When you're ready.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started so we can get to as many of your questions as possible tonight. We're fortunate to have 9 panelists for Montgomery County's 4th stream restoration webinar tonight. It's the final webinar in our series. Our format will be a little different than our past 3 webinars. We'll be having a lively discussion tonight amongst our panelists with less presentations. They'll be considering some of the questions you've submitted already in their discussion tonight. We appreciate everyone who submitted questions already and who will ask questions tonight. Like always, please remember to stay muted during our panelist discussion. The chat feature on Zoom will be available for you to use during the webinar. It's great for short, simple questions for our panelists. After the panelist discussion, you'll have the opportunity to ask a question tonight. You can raise your hand in Zoom using the Zoom Reactions tab. Please don't unmute until our moderator, Sadie, has called on you later tonight. Please make sure your name is shown in the Participants tab so our moderator can properly call on you later tonight. Lastly, you are able to change your Zoom session view in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. I like to use the full screen mode myself so I can see everyone during a discussion. All of our sessions are recorded. You probably hit the OK button when you joined tonight, and these are all available on the registration website that you use to register, as well as DEP's YouTube channel, which is easy to find by Googling. And I will actually go ahead and put that in the chat here in a second in case you want to binge watch all 4 stream restoration webinars at an upcoming weekend. So with that, I will turn it over to Sadie Drescher from the Chesapeake Bay Trust to get us going tonight.
Great, thanks so much, Christy. And thanks again to Montgomery County for hosting the webinar series. Thanks to all of you who are taking the time to be here tonight. And a big thanks to our panelists for participating in tonight's roundtable. I'm Sadie Drescher. I'm the Vice President of Programs for Restoration at the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and my role for tonight and throughout the webinar series is to facilitate the discussion. A little bit about the Trust. We're a nonprofit state organization that focuses on environmental education, restoration, and engagement, largely by making grants. I'm happy to be here moderating these sessions and learning along with everyone. The purpose of the webinar series is to discuss stream restoration and the various aspects of the county's restoration program, the techniques used in practice, and future planning efforts. The first meeting was to hear from Montgomery County residents about stream restoration, and this feedback continued to guide the webinar series. The second webinar focused on watershed management and stream restoration, project selection, and what the research is telling us. The third webinar covered trees, non-native invasive plants, and maintenance. And this fourth webinar, we invited all the previous speakers back and added a few more expert voices to be here with you all tonight. As promised, Department of Environmental Protection listened to the comments, concerns, and questions made throughout the webinar series and posed these to the panelists speaking tonight. Questions such as, how are we protecting trees during stream restoration? How are we considering stream restoration and upstream green infrastructure? And many others that we heard from you throughout the webinar series. And they fit broadly into that overarching question of where and when should stream restoration be considered? In addition, the panel will be addressing several of the questions you posed during the registration process, such as how to improve stormwater runoff, what role do businesses and industry play in stream restoration in Montgomery County and the state of Maryland, what are effective ways to manage invasive species. The format for tonight is to hear from each of our panelists who are addressing and answering your questions and comments. After we hear from the panelists, there will be a question and answer session where we will open the floor to questions for the panelists, which you can do by raising your hand in Zoom, as Christy said, and I'll also be posing a couple of questions to the panelists that we got from you during the registration and that we received through the chat. So we value each of your time and look forward to hearing your comments. I ask that we're all respectful of each other and are open to learning and hearing from the speakers and from each other tonight. I'm really looking forward to it, so let's get started. Each speaker will briefly introduce themselves and have the floor for about 5 minutes. I'll be keeping time and transitioning to the next speaker. Thanks again to all of our panelists for sharing your experience with us so we can all continue to learn more about stream restoration in Montgomery County. So with that, I'll hand it over to Solange Filoso. She's an associate research professor at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. Take it away, Solange.
Hello. So I am
my area of expertise, so you know, it's water quality and watershed hydrology, and I have been monitoring stream restoration or restored streams in Maryland for over a decade. So I'm very happy to be here, and I hope that with my background and expertise, I can answer some of your questions. Thank you. So anyway, I was given like some topics to talk about based on questions that were raised during the past webinars, and so I'm going to just talk briefly about them. So first, I want to start by saying that I think it's wonderful that you're all here participating in this series, and it's because you care about the watershed where you live, and that's a topic that I think is very important, because everyone who lives in a watershed is a stakeholder. But also, it's good to keep in mind that we, by living in a watershed, we also inadvertently have an impact in that watershed. So we need to understand that it's important that we participate in the protection and restoration of that watershed, including the streams, but we also have to understand that we cause impact. We can't help it, but that's how it happens. So it's nice to have this kind of conversation and hopefully to participate early in decision-making process. And it's also good to keep in mind when we all participate in discussions like this, that it's good to keep in mind that watersheds, urban watersheds or urbanized watersheds or catchments, they really change when we develop, especially with urbanization. We change how fast, by developing, by changing, having land use change, we change how much and how fast water moves through the landscape and into streams. So we just totally altered the hydrology of a watershed. And so it's good to keep in mind that there is no way a stream can be ever restored to a pristine condition unless we have a more natural water balance in the catchment, which would be great to do, but it is hard. And then it goes to my next talking point that I would like to say is that ideally, when we talk about restoring a stream, ideally we, instead of going to to patch up the symptoms, we should try to eliminate the cause of the problems. The cause of the problems is like development and modifying the water balance, but it's hard to do that because there are too many challenges that need to be overcome. Not that that are impossible to overcome, but there are several of them, and I'll just mention some. So it's, for example, we have usually excess stormwater runoff in urbanized watersheds, lack of space for repair and restoration. We also have sometimes not enough support from landowners or others. We have altered sediment supplies, legacy impacts on streams from former land use. So all these things are challenges that need to be overcome if we ever want to restore the water balance in a watershed, and it's hard to get there. And so I know that there has been some questions about whether or not then we should, because restoration, since we can't restore streams to the pristine condition, or at least the condition that people envision, whether or not we should just put a moratorium on stream restoration. And I have one thing to say. By monitoring streams for more than a decade, one thing we have learned is that stream restoration does help, is effective at reducing at least sediment transport to downstream water. It's very effective. And so moratorium would definitely have a negative impact in that term, and impact downstream waters as well. And then just to finish, I just want to say that another thing that stream restoration helps us with, this project, is to learn about restoration by monitoring stream restoration, we guarantee the long-term success of restoration efforts. And we also learn by learning about past projects, we can also improve the ability to deliver successful projects in the future. So restoration helps us with that too. You know, the science is like it's something that is progressing all the time. So that's it. That's all that I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Solange. It's great to open with your perspective as a scientist. So next we'll go to Scott Lowe. He's the Director of Environmental Services for McCormick & Taylor.
Thanks, Sadie. Thanks, Solange. I really appreciated being on the last talk, and I guess the points that I wanted to make were about the selection of when and where, the decision-making process that I've been a part of, and I think is good to go through to determine whether or not stream restoration is applicable to a particular area. I view restoration as being able to look at and attempt to solve 3 different impairments. And I think stream, as an important part of what we look at, is only streams that are impaired really need to be restored or intervened with in some physical way. The levels of impairment, some of which Solange kind of mentioned, one is physical manipulation of the actual channel itself. And what we've seen through historic land use and mill dams and channelization agricultural processes, that the vast majority of streams in the mid-Atlantic region have been impacted physically, moved their location or channelized in some form or fashion since colonization. So looking at the level of perturbation that's occurred is really important. The other 2 are related to the watershed that drains to it, where one is, like was mentioned, the volume of water and and not just the amount, but also the rate at which it is delivered to the stream system is greater than the ability of the stream to resist it. So much of the research shows that as sediment is a main impairment for the Chesapeake Bay, that stream banks themselves are up to 70% of the sources in certain watersheds associated with those pollutants that are delivered to the bay. So being able to combine an approach where we're looking at stabilizing stream banks in a natural regenerative way to minimize that source is important. It's better when it is combined with stormwater management type of approaches, so that you're coupling both a reduction of the water and the rate of the water with a stabilization of the resource that's impaired. And the third is when you have stream systems that are incapable of performing their natural function. So things like culverted systems where we could daylight them, channelized systems that have been concreted to expedite flow off into different streams, even like curb and gutter systems that are maintained where some people, to preserve their yards or to preserve drainage patterns, are then directing water faster into stream systems. They're directing that problem into the stream system later on. So those approaches create problems for someone else downstream. Those types of things are where you're trying to look for opportunities to provide a restoration strategy. I also believe there's an importance to looking at the resources that are adjacent as well as the infrastructure. And is the stream impairment going to cause further damage, loss of wetlands, loss of trees? I've certainly seen lots of projects where there's a tremendous amount of impact to adjacent wetlands associated with stream bank erosion and channel incision, where wetlands are shown to be one of the most tremendous amount of carbon sequestration resources, 30 to 50 times in some areas as compared to even forests. So wetland preservation is another critical aspect of it. And looking at infrastructure, so we're not clogging culverts or creating flood problems that are going to be issues for human health moving forward or safety. Those are also things that should be done. And as I said before, I think we really need to focus a lot of work on combining projects together that are a watershed approach. I also think the restoration strategy should match the impairment and provide value to the adjacent resources that are bisected or interacting with the stream features. And the last point I want to make real quick is that as we're moving forward, I think all these restoration strategies should be designed as carbon sinks, where we're looking at the soil creation, additional plantings, wetland creation, preservation of developable land. Whereas if we don't look at these projects in more detail, they may be encroached on for future development. All those things are important to consider.
Great. Thanks a lot, Scott, for that kind of holistic view and giving us a lot to think about. Next, we'll go to Eliza. She's with the Stormwater Partners Network and also the Director of Conservation for the Audubon Naturalist Society. So take it away, Eliza.
Hi, and thank you. Hi, everybody. This is my first time on one of these webinars and appreciate the invitation to join. I'm Eliza Cava, the Director of Conservation, as Sadie said, at Audubon Naturalist Society, but I'll be speaking tonight, certainly in these opening remarks, just on behalf of the Stormwater Partners Network, of which I co-chair. And I noticed a lot of familiar names in the participants list from the Stormwater Partners Network. Hello, members and friends. Our mission is a coalition in Montgomery County that advocates for clean water, protecting and improving our watersheds in ways that are equitable and ecologically sensitive, improving community resilience to stormwater impacts such as storm-driven flooding, and connecting communities to their backyard waterways. And we have, forgive me because the numbers just changed, but we have 20-something organizational groups and a number of individual members as well, people who join us for learning and information sharing. So we convened a stream restoration working group in fall of 2020 to discuss this issue and provide recommendations to our agency partners with the goal of commenting on the statewide draft stormwater permit, the MS4 permit. We did not get to unanimity on very much of anything besides some sort of best practices that if stream restorations are done, they should be done in some of these ways. And I'll describe those in a minute. But we also didn't get to unanimity on the overriding question of whether stream restorations are ever or at all appropriate. And from these webinar series and the comments and questions from participants, you know that there's a really wide range of issues in the sort of citizen resident community on opinions on whether they should be done or not. So we have all those opinions within Stormwater Partners Network, and therefore didn't come up with a position, sort of for or against or any particular kind of stream restoration. But what we did all agree on is that if they're done, they should be done with extraordinary care, caution, and forethought to ensure that they do result in benefits to the ecology of the local stream valley and riparian system, as well as the downstream beneficiaries of reduced sediment pollution like the Potomac River and the Chesapeake Bay. And that if and when they're done, they should be done tightly coupled with really extensive upland retrofits, meaning stormwater management up out of the stream valley itself, ideally before restoring the stream valley. Another thing that we do all agree on is that the statewide permitting programs overly incentivize stream restoration, is something we believe. That as it stands, stream restoration is a very broad category within that MS4 permitting program through the accounting guidance that the state has issued. Almost no matter how they're designed, they all get the same kinds of credits. And they are often sort of the most efficient or cheapest way to gain MS4 credit within a jurisdiction. So if they're used, they should be used to achieve not only Bay level, but local level improvements. And we have worked for years on trying to adjust those incentives and have more work to do on it. Another thing that we as a network discussed is that we know that biological improvements can be rare or very slow with stream restoration. And so our advice to regulators, permittees, and contractors is that they need to proceed with great caution and beware making unsupported claims or claims that really won't, might happen sometime in the future, but we're unsure. If these are scientific enterprises that are being studied, that needs to be very clear to residents and neighbors so that they know what to expect and don't expect ecological rebound very quickly. The last thing I wanted to say is that there's one thing that we're excited about, which is that DEP has over the last couple of years produced a new set of targeting and prioritization maps for stream restoration and upland retrofits. I'm sure this has been talked about on previous webinars, where the idea is that any place where stream restoration has already been done will be a priority area for more upland retrofits in that watershed, and any place where stream restorations should be done only, or I guess priority targeted to places where there already is a lot of upland retrofits. Because what we really don't want to see is, if a stream restoration is done, a lot of investment is placed into that stream valley, it's structurally changed, and then a great big storm comes through and blows it out because of climate change, because of continued impervious surfaces upstream. So we want to be sure that if and when they're done in very sensitive locations and with a full watershed strategy. And I'm looking forward to more discussion later.
So much, Eliza. I really appreciate those thoughts and comments from your group. All right, next we'll move to Scott Mcgill. He's the CEO of Ecotone Incorporated. So Scott, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this discussion this evening. My name is Scott Mcgill. I'm the president, founder of Ecotone. We're a design build ecological restoration company. And you know, over the years, I've seen quite a bit of restoration. I guess I wanted to mention that, you know, the first restoration project that I worked on as a young graduate from college was, I think, one of the first natural channel design projects in Maryland. And one of the things that struck me on that project was that, you know, we didn't bring anything in to restore the stream. We didn't bring in any rock. You know, there wasn't a lot of dump trucks. You know, it was basically four of us, and we went into this forest and moved around the trees and did our best to restore the stream, and it was a successful project. And then you know, I got into this field of stream restoration, and you know, I think in many ways let me share my screen. So I think I'm the only one that's going to share a few slides, but this idea of stream restoration, you know, and when and where should it be applied? You know, it's a big question, right? And there's a lot of different variations on stream restoration, what it looks like, how it's designed, how it's engineered. And you know, these are all projects that Ecotone has either been the contractor for or designed. You know, we like the ones on the top, right? They look and function ecologically. They have a lot of vegetation. You know, both projects that you're looking at up top, there was virtually no import of materials. So, you know, we took this sort of less is more approach, a sustainable approach. But in many cases, you know, we've been involved in projects. Sometimes as a contractor, we design others, projects designed by others. And you know, I think we've incorporated a lot of engineering into our designs, and you know, sometimes maybe we get a little overzealous. Factors of safety is what we call it in our field. And you know, we're getting away from sort of getting to that ecological uplift. So you know, when I look at a project, I'm curious as to how much ecological uplift we can provide, and how we can do that. And you know, this field is evolving such that you know, we're looking at more nature-based approaches. And you know, there's a project that I'd like to share with you that I've been working on for almost 30 years. And it's a little creek in Baltimore County. And you know, I've seen this creek evolve over time. Back then, we didn't have much money, so we installed a lot of trees and shrubs and planted along the stream and tried to give it some shade. But over time, you know, it evolved, and then our friend the North American beaver came along and turned it into what you see at the right. So this is the same stream over a course of 25 years. And I guess that's one of the points I wanted to make, is that sometimes ecological restoration takes a lot longer than we want it to. And sometimes, you know, the initial signs of success aren't right away. But you know, I think that the field is moving, the industry is moving toward a less invasive approach, to where we can achieve flood mitigation, where we can achieve ecological uplift, without, you know, what I like to call a heavy diesel approach. So, you know, in many cases, you know, leaving trees is certainly what everyone wants to do, and protecting those trees. And we can do it in a way that's sustainable, but also achieves the goals and the objectives that we set out to achieve. And lastly, I'm not sure if I'll be able to talk about this later on in the but certainly we can bring it up as a discussion point, is you know, I'm a big nature buff. I spend a lot of time in state parks, and one of the things that I've noticed over the last 40 years is that the deer population is really going crazy. And I know many of us here on this webinar are concerned about trees and our forests. And, we can't underestimate the fact that many of our parks and the land that we live on, even our homes, are considered deer pasture at this point. And I think that's something that we all agree is a problem that we need to address. I'm not a deer hater, but I'm also well aware that every one of the projects that I've been involved in has to deal with a lot of deer pressure when we reforest an area or replant. So it's a topic that I'd love to keep discussing. So with that, I'll turn it back.
Great, thanks, Scott. And then next we have Joe Berg. He's a senior restoration ecologist for Biohabitat. So take it away, Joe. And we can't hear you yet.
It helps to take myself off mute. There's an old adage that says if something's important, say it twice. So I'm going to repeat some of what we've heard from each of the presenters so far. Our pattern of development has really modified the drainage network. It's caused a lot of channel erosion, a lot of sediment transport downstream, a lot of degradation of aquatic habitat, disconnection from floodplains, incision of shallow groundwater, loss of wetland hydrology. And all of those things are not intentional, but they are the result of our development patterns, agriculture as well as residential and commercial. A good stream restoration where you reconnect the stream to its floodplain, where you increase opportunities for storage of water along the flow path, where the stream has diverse habitat through the incorporation of wood structures. They all work. All those elements of stream restoration can work to reverse some of the undesirable attributes that our streams are exposed to. Now, you're not going to fix square miles of development with a 1,000-foot stream restoration project. It's going to take upland structures, upland BMPs, smarter design, LID, reduced reliance on impervious paving and parking. It's a broader based solution, and it will include a lot more stream restoration, not less. Historically, everything that we see that is currently forest was ag field, either pasture in the case of maybe too wet floodplains or cropland. 50 to 100 years ago, we reduced and abandoned about 50% of our agricultural lands, and they have seeded back into these forests and stream valleys that we now know. But in the interim, and when ag was king, and as Scott mentioned, we had issues with water power, where we modified a stream plan and profile to capitalize on the density of water and the ability for water to power mills and other kinds of equipment. The farmers moving the stream from the center of a field to the edge of a field so that they could have better crop yield. All of these things have happened in the stream valley systems that we all currently value. So we really have to think about that historic landscape ecology. And also as Scott Mcgill said, 20 to 30 years ago, when stream restoration was really just beginning, we were really focused on this bankful channel design approach, which was basically a channel that was sized to handle all of the frequent storm flows. And it was designed to convey whatever was delivered to it. So sediment delivered to the stream was conveyed downstream. Otherwise, that sediment would accumulate in the channel, cause channel erosion, and So that was the design approach. And that design approach, called natural channel design, is still used in a lot of conditions, especially where our development patterns have encroached on the floodplain, where we have our stream channels are bordered by gravity sewer lines or other utilities. There's not a lot of terrific opportunity to fix those problems with stream restoration unless we peel up properties that encroach in the floodplain, and unless we convert our gravity sewer system to a pressure sewer system. But those are really large infrastructure investments, and that's the kind of thing that Solange was talking about early on. So without making those kind of incredible investments, we are working with refining our approach to stream restoration to put more land in contact with the water that is coming off of our watersheds, to protect the land, meaning not clear a right of way for the stream, not lining the stream with a bunch of rock, but trying to walk that line between doing what's best for the drainage network as well as conserving the most resources that currently exist in our stream valleys and floodplains.
And Joe, we're right at 5 minutes. So maybe if you wanted to add one more point, or.
Well, it's really the foundation is that stream restoration is a young science, and everybody, the academicians, the regulators, the practitioners are all working pretty hard to try to improve the approach and get this sort of feedback, so we're making better choices going forwards than we have in the past. So don't want to run too long. Thanks.
No, thanks a lot. Yeah, and that's a great point, that we are all on the same team. We all want the best project. So how do we get there? So learning together, like through these webinar series, is one way. All right, next, Sujay Kaushal. He is a professor at the University of Maryland. So Sujay, go ahead and take it away.
Sure, I'll echo what Joe and Sadie said. So just a personal background, we've worked with evaluating stream restoration impacts on water quality and trade-offs associated with tree removal recently. I say we because our work has involved many graduate students and collaborators and colleagues over the years. So it's been a real team project to understand these complex issues. Our recent research, which we presented at the tree part of this seminar or this webinar series, has found that there are groundwater quality impacts from removing trees for about 5 years after restoration, and then there's a recovery period. We're unclear whether these are localized impacts on water quality affecting a small area or whether they're important from a broader watershed perspective, so there's some unknowns there. More research is needed to investigate the effects of the restoration process, basically from the start to the finish of water quality over time as these projects mature. So this includes long-term improvements in water quality and any kind of trade-offs associated with different practices. I just want to emphasize what Joe just mentioned. Restoration is an evolving process, and our research has documented long-term changes in water quality over time, both groundwater and surface water. We've documented improvements over time. We've also documented trade-offs. As scientists, we try to be unbiased in the way we approach these things and work with the numbers. So for some of you out there, I'm a Montgomery County resident, and you're probably thinking, oh, how are these restorations done? What's going on? It's like a black box. Restoration is informed by scientific research in our Montgomery County community and elsewhere in the Chesapeake Bay region. Restoration is the product of extensive monitoring, analysis of data, evaluating what works and doesn't work best, and then communication among groups. I communicate with Sadie, sometimes maybe too much. Joe Berg, I know from panels. I know a lot of these, Solange, I worked with her for a period of time. So we all communicate with each other. Restoration in some shape or form is more or less a reality from the perspective of managing the quantity and quality of water, as Scott mentioned. In our role as scientists, we try to work together and communicate with the management community to account for both benefits and trade-offs. So this can allow us to determine whether a restoration project is meeting its water quality goals and indicate areas for improvement in the future with designs. Restorations are very diverse and evolving living and geological systems. I'm in a geology department, but I have 2 degrees in biology. We need to comprehensively evaluate across all stages of the process, including mature stages of the project. And sometimes this can take years or decades. Because restoration is a reality, we need to account for all benefits and trade-offs using data and numbers to improve the process. It's very difficult as a scientist. I can't say good or bad because I don't say value judgments. Argument is no substitute for evidence. My advisor used to always say that to me. Argument is no substitute for evidence. We are working together as a community to gain more insight.
Well, thanks a lot, Sujay. And Sujay is right. We do all work together, and it's great to be here to hear your questions and be able to answer them too and have this dialogue. Communication is definitely key. All right, next, let's have Steve Finley. He's with the Montgomery County Planning Department. So Steve, go ahead and take it away.
Good evening, and thank you very much. I'm glad to be here this evening and participating in this. This is a very important discussion to have, and I know that there are a lot of different approaches and opinions to this. I do work as a planner at the Montgomery County Planning Department. I'll start by saying, trying to answer the question, when and where should stream restoration be conducted in 5 minutes is a bit like trying to give a brief history of the United States in 60 seconds. But I want to share a few of my thoughts. This is based in part on my education. My master's degree work focused on hydrology and how it relates to natural resources management. And I've got over 30 years of experience walking the stream valleys in Montgomery County. From the beginning of my work here, I have focused on several natural resources issues in particular, and different environmental management concerns, including the impacts of human activity on terrestrial and aquatic habitats, the impacts of habitat loss and degradation on the loss of biodiversity, and preserving and protecting air and water quality. And in the past 20 years or so, I've focused increasingly on climate change, human health effects, and environmental justice issues. So I think stream restoration techniques of some kind should probably be applied where stream banks have been severely downcut, exposed to the continuing erosive force of flowing water, and where streams are cut off from their floodplains. These are areas where too much runoff has put our streams out of balance, and ongoing damage is occurring. That's kind of a key piece of this, that there's ongoing damage occurring in our aquatic ecosystems. And those extend from the point of the damage all the way down the stream into the rivers and down to the Chesapeake Bay. I've seen a number of examples of this in Montgomery County streams where I've seen steep sloughing stream banks that are generating new pulses of sediment downstream every time there's a significant rainfall event. I've seen stream bank trees that have been undercut by erosion that have fallen into the stream. They lodge perpendicular to the stream flow and redirect the flow into the stream banks, gouging out large new areas of erosion and sending more sediment downstream. I've seen silted streams where aquatic habitats are being impaired, and I've seen aerial photos of sediment plumes extending from our streams into lakes that are emergency drinking water supplies and into the Potomac River. I've seen sewer lines exposed and imperiled from stream bank erosion, and those threaten sewage spills into our waterways. I share with a lot of people the dismay of seeing invasive species take over our stream valleys, and I've been watching that occurring for a good portion of my 30 years, unfortunately. I'm especially aware of this in the spring when I go looking for spring wildflowers that are no longer where I used to find them. And this seems to be a problem all over the region. I've also followed the efforts to clean up the Chesapeake Bay, and we spent billions of dollars on trying to do that, to try to restore really a priceless resource that's still being damaged by pollution, and particularly sediment pollution. I'm also very aware of the growing problems of climate change, and I realize that functioning floodplains are critically important. Floodplains are basically nature's engineering approach to flood control, and they can't do their vital work if the water from the streams can no longer get to the floodplains. So these things I've briefly mentioned are indicators of where I think some form of stream restoration should be considered, as well as a bit of the why question. A more specific answer to where, and maybe a little bit to the how, streams should be restored, I think involves consideration of a number of other complex factors, including assessments of habitat sensitivity. For example, whether a damaged stream is located in a forest interior, where we don't want to open the canopy and disturb that critical forest interior habitat. In areas where we know rare, threatened, or endangered native species are found, where there's an intact native plant ecosystem that has very few native species in a really high quality version. And in those areas, doing the absolute minimum disturbance to the surrounding terrestrial ecosystem is really critical. Other considerations are specific to the engineering approach, including flow regimes, how erodible the soils are, and a variety of factors like that. As someone who's worked for a long time on habitat loss, fragmentation, and degradation, on biological diversity, human health, air and water quality, and climate change, I absolutely know the inestimable value of trees and forests to overall environmental health. And I also know how all these issues are inextricably interrelated. Our work is always focused on trying to find the right balance. Since a lot of my work focuses on preserving trees and forests, I do support research into refining stream restoration techniques to minimize tree and forest loss. At the Montgomery County Planning Department, we're working on continuing efforts right now to reduce our tree and forest loss. We're working now on recommendations that I know I have colleagues here working on as well to try to minimize other environmental damage.
Well, thanks so much, Steve. I really appreciate it. You went over a little bit, but you were making some really great points. So I really appreciate hearing those points and giving that overview for everybody and kind of touching on climate change. And I hope for the audience, you're hearing your questions. We went back and re-listened to the webinars, of course, looked at our notes, and then took questions again. So the panelists are addressing the questions, as I mentioned in the beginning, that you all have asked, and the comments and feedback. All right, next, we're going to go to Laura Miller. She's with the Department of Environmental Protection. So Laura, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks so much, Sadie. As she said, I'm Laura Miller. I'm the Forest Conservation Coordinator with DEP, and I'm a registered forester and a tree care expert. And I'm here to kind of add to the collective knowledge about trees and forests and streams. So I really hope I can help you. As you've heard several times, we're talking about when and where should we do stream restoration and how do we make that decision. I'm going to share my screen with you and show you a couple of slides. Trees are one of the many indicators that we have that provide clues to stream and riparian health. And these photos show where there's some trees that are slumping or falling into the stream because there's no longer soil and aggregate rock to hold them up. You can see by the blue triangles that they've leaned off of their normal upright position, and they're very likely to fail. There's also an image of trees that have exposed roots, which you saw in my last PowerPoint, and there are trees that are completely undercut, where all of the soil has washed out from under them. Well, these are clear indications that the stream system and the riparian forest combined is a little bit out of balance. And as I said, these will most likely fail prematurely if erosion continues. So it's another point that's worth noting in these images, especially the two with photos, is that they look natural and green to us. They're gradually declining forest communities. They're not progressing as nature intended, as I mentioned in the prior seminar that we had. There should be full understories, many plants and shrubs and herbaceous things on the ground layer, probably a much thicker forest duff or layer on top of the soil to help absorb all the water and filter it as it's cleaning. So there's not as much of a healthy forest condition as we believe that there is. It's kind of sometimes a green lie when we look and we think, oh, that's really quite beautiful, but it's not as healthy as we've come to believe it to be. So it's important for us to understand that in most of the forest communities in the county, there's no new growth that's replacing the mature trees as well. And if you remember what Scott Lowe told us, is that streams in the entire region are compromised. And Scott Mcgill and both Steve Finley told us that there's been a huge impact of deer in our riparian forests. And we see that in the lack of understory and the lack of regeneration. So these forests and stream systems are compromised. I agree with both of those, all three of those gentlemen. The next slide, if I can change my slide here. There we go. Well, DEP's efforts to minimize tree loss along streams includes completing stream restoration projects. As you can see in the before photo, there's lots of dead and down debris from trees that have succumbed to this tremendous amount of erosion in this stream valley. And so doing these restoration projects and doing them in a timely manner will actually save trees in the riparian and some of the health of the riparian forests in general. DEP uses many techniques to improve the outcomes for these individual trees, including limiting soil compaction. But when we do our moving around with the machines, we use mulch mats, we plank trees to protect them, we pack underneath some of the exposed roots and cover the exposed roots to create additional growing space for the trees. And we simply avoid impacts by shifting stream features to opposite banks or dissipating the water's energy away from trees. So we have quite a host of techniques that we use to favor trees and to retain as many as possible. At the end of the day, there is a little bit of disturbance with every stream restoration project, and so we plant a lot of trees and shrubs and we often almost always plant above the required mitigation. And it's one of the ways that we improve the long-term success of the restoration along the stream and the entire forest community, because as these trees grow and develop, then they do stabilize the community. They provide some regeneration for the next age group, and then the root systems stabilize the bank, and as many other benefits of it. So as we move these streams in forest communities towards the woods in good condition that is credited under the stormwater management programs and permits, we see these improvements also that tumble over into the flora and the fauna, and the increase in diversity and the stability of the whole system. And as Sujay said to us, the stream restoration is evolving. It's evolving along with our understanding of the entire system. And in turn, we're moving towards better management of these entire systems. And that in turn moves us towards more sustainable riparian forest and stream systems in our urban communities. I think those were the main points that I wanted to make.
Great. Thanks so much, Laura. I really appreciate that. And as you can see, Laura is addressing some of the questions that were asked, not only before, but some of the ones that are coming up in the chat already. All right, next, and this is the last prepared speaker, and then we'll open it up to the group for a Q&A with the panelists. We have Amy Stevens. She's the manager for planning and outreach monitoring section at the Watershed Restoration Division, Department of Environmental Protection. Take it away, Amy.
Thank you, Sadie, and thank you to all of our panelists who have spoke before me. As Sadie said, I work for Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection, and I've worked here for almost 19 years. And I work within the Watershed Restoration Division, and most of my primary responsibilities are coordinating our MS4 permit, working with outreach of our environmental education programs around water, and also with the stream monitoring team. I'm going to give some of DEP's perspective today, a little bit about what we do and why we're doing stream restoration, amongst many other things that we do. Our mission is to improve and protect our water quality. And so we do this with a number of programming. We monitor our streams to better understand our stream health, and we use this data to adapt our programming. We are trying to learn and continuously learn about our watershed conditions, and we do this through watershed assessments, and this helps us prioritize our restoration work that we're doing in the county. We have programs that are specific for inspecting and maintaining our stormwater management BMPs, because while it's great to install, the real work is in making sure they continue to always function. We have programs like Tree Montgomery, where we can provide free trees. We have Rainscapes, where we can provide rebates for installation of BMPs. We provide watershed grants through Chesapeake Bay Trust. You know, we do a lot of work with private property owners to try to engage them. We work in pet waste and litter reduction. And all of this is to try to improve our water quality. We also install a lot of stormwater BMPs. We do retrofits of aging stormwater ponds that were built in the 80s and 90s and need improvements. We put in new stormwater management like ESD practices and LID practices around the county. So those are all the work we do. And we do stream restoration too, but we do so much more. I mean, you've heard tonight that our streams are out of equilibrium. We know this. I mean, this county has been impacted by agriculture 100 to 200 years ago. And then we started building sidewalks, roads, buildings. And even then we weren't putting in stormwater management. It's only more recently that we've done that. And now we're over 1 million residents in the county. A lot of people fitting in a little area. We have eroding streams and that's a problem. And it's creating sedimentation and problems in our streams. Our aquatic ecology, the bugs and the fish and those critters that live in the streams, they can't survive with all that sedimentation in there. And that affects more than just them. It affects our food web and our surrounding biodiversity in our county. Even if we do install upland BMPs, the streams are going to continue to erode because there is already too much water and not enough space for all those stormwater BMPs. We know the streams will change their hydrology because there's more water, it's moving faster. Their hydraulics, it's losing its connection to the floodplain. You've heard that a few times. And its physical structure, it's losing the components that are important for the biology, the pools and the riffles. We just can't put in enough upland BMPs to mimic a forest in good condition, which is what our streams need to be able to be the quality that you want it to be. So, and on top of that, our streams are responding to the climate change, and it's been doing that for more than just now, even though it's becoming a big issue, and that's fabulous. It's been going on for at least over 10 years or more. So with all of this and the 1 million people that are in our county, you just simply can't expect our streams to be able to coexist without some level of management. And that's what we're all here to do. If we can't leave our streams alone, it's just simply not an option. Not if we want to improve water quality, sedimentation, and protect infrastructure and protect private property. We know from our own monitoring and from research that upland BMPs alone are not going to solve the problem. And we know we need them, and we will continue to install BMPs, and we will continue to do that, but we also need to do stream restoration. We have a suitability map that you heard Eliza mention earlier, and the link was placed in the chat. That's one of the ways that we are using to help us find locations for stream restoration. But in order to do that, we set up very specific criteria about where to identify restoration. We want upland treatment first. We want to see that before we go in to do restoration. We want to make sure that we have areas where improving biology and ecosystem function is possible because there's another stream there that can provide the source of the critters that can then hopefully survive in that improved environment. And if we don't have a source population, we're not going to be able to see the biology improve. We also want to make sure we put our stream restoration in smaller drainage areas. And we're really looking to do that in places that have less than 1,000 acres so that we are actually able to ensure that stream restoration is stable. But that is information that we have learned over time. And that's something else the practitioners have been telling you, is that this isn't something we knew. We are learning it, and we are trying to adapt. We are striving to the county is striving to minimize our footprint when we go out to do our stream restoration. We do not clear all the trees. As Laura has told you, we are very, very careful about protecting our streams. And we do go in and plant more trees than what would have been lost through the stream restoration, or even if we've left the stream alone. We are striving to manage the invasive.
Sorry, Amy, I don't want to cut you off, but you're at 6 minutes.
I'm at 6
Keep going.
minutes. All right, that's all right. You'll hear from me later. Thank you, Sadie, for doing that. And thank you, everybody.
Sorry about that, Amy. And I was kind of prepping to see which question we might address first. And so panelists, I'll give a couple of instructions to the group, but I'm thinking the question that Ken and a couple others have asked about controlling upland versus downstream, and if the stream banks will get better. And I think we've kind of touched on that, but it might be good to address that. And so just think about that. So that'll be our first question. But for this next session, and we have about 23 minutes or so, again, if you want to ask a question, you want to verbalize it, please raise your hand. If you're Montgomery County residents, these are for Montgomery County webinars are for you all. And then we've got a lot of great questions in the chat, which is wonderful. So I'll go there. And then of course we have the questions you have in the registration. So I guess panelists, and Marion, I see you, but I'm going to go to the kind of burning question or questions. Who would like to address that? Upstream versus downstream, and if we do upstream, will the stream banks get better? Go ahead, Sanja.
Well, that is something that I have been monitoring and studying for a while, and so there is no doubt that fixing or improving conditions upstream will help downstream. At the same time, I think that there are some instances where not enough is possible to be done upstream, and I have actually seen even streams that I have monitored that that have been stored upstream where there was way too much storm water that the restoration itself couldn't hold. And so I think in theory it makes sense. That's where we should go. Because that's where there is a lot of storm. I mean, storm flow is like a big deal, and restoration can really, as we improve the restoration approaches or methods, I know that we are more and more able to control, to reduce stormwater in these, headwater streams, for example. So we should go for that. But we also have to keep in mind that sometimes it's not possible. But I agree, with some of the comments that I read. In my view, we should, try to do everything possible in the watershed to reduce stormwater quantity and how fast it moves to the stream, and then go from the top of the watershed, the stream, down. To me, that's the approach we should always try to use.
Thanks a lot, Solange. And I know some of your research results, we heard Montgomery County say they are using it. So Ken, do you want to also add on to that? And then, oh, sorry, Scott, go ahead. And then Ken.
I just wanted to say that there's kind of the two approaches to stormwater management. One is focused on water quality. So the ESD type features where you will see where the heavier storms will bypass those types of treatments. And then there's the larger quantity type of management features. Some of the studies that have been done are focused on managing the water quality aspects. You need a tremendous amount of space for those. And the ESD type features are important for managing water quality, but they're very difficult to install. I had one project where I looked at 400 different sites in Montgomery County neighborhood, and between residents who were not willing to participate, utility conflicts, soil conflicts due to fill and severe compaction of yards and things like that during the process of development, there was only 30 or 40 of those sites that were even available to be an ESD type of feature. So even when you see an open space and think it may be available, it's potentially not going to be really helpful. And then the quantity aspects, you need a tremendous amount of space. And I know there's arguments to say, oh, there is that amount of space. But most of our watersheds, particularly in the county, you're going to need roughly 20% of the county area to store water to return it to the woods in good condition. We're not talking about a trivial amount of space. It is a tremendous amount of space. And to negate that or to minimize that is false. There's also conditions that are reached with the stream channels themselves, where geometrically, based on the soil conditions, even if all of the water is eliminated, they will not stop eroding. So that is also a false narrative that cutting off all the water will eliminate all the erosion.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Scott. And that's a really important question. And you did make some of those points, I know, last time. So I know repetition helps me. Ken, you want to add on that? And then we'll go to the questions with the hands.
Very quickly, my name is Ken Mack. Different Ken. Sorry, Ken Bauer. I am the Senior Water Quality Specialist for the county. We have the same question. We had that question a long time ago, so we started to do our own research in our special protection areas. And those of you who are county residents may be familiar, we have areas that we have especially stringent development requirements. Through that process, we partnered with USGS, and we found that much like what Scott Lowe was saying, we are not protecting our streams from the erosive flows, even in areas that are greenfield developments where we have infinite space to install stormwater. So these areas are held to a higher standard than anywhere else in the state of Maryland, and we have failed really to protect the stream channel above 0.7 inches of rain, which historically was a pretty average amount of rain. Now that has become an extremely common amount of rain that we see multiple times a month. So with that knowledge, we do need to do something to protect our stream channels after the fact. Even when you have the absolute maximum amount of stormwater possible, every inch of impervious surface is treated.
Thanks a lot, Ken. And sorry, I didn't clarify, Ken Mack. All right, Marion, you want to ask your question of the panelists? And I remember you from past webinars, so I believe you're a Montgomery County resident, so go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I would say that what I haven't heard a lot about is how biologically rich a stream is to begin with. Because even with the best of intentions, it's common sense that when you bulldoze a stream at that time, you're killing the life. And so it would seem to me very important to study how biologically rich that stream is to begin with before it becomes, in effect, sacrificed for other considerations like flood control. And my question concerns who is studying the life in that stream before restoration, before a decision is made to quote unquote restore it. And how do you prevent conflicts of interest? Because if the studies are made, with all due respect, and I'm impressed by some of your panelists who work on this, but if the studies are made by the same people who are going to get the contracts, which is how they make a living, it seems to me important for eliminating conflicts of interest to have independent ecologists looking at biological diversity and basing your selections on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marion. Important question, and I'm so glad you raised it. So Ken, I see you want to answer, and then any of our other panelists want to build on that.
So Marion, my job is largely to look at the ecology within the county. I run a program where we provide county-wide watershed monitoring. We primarily focus on fish and benthic macroinvertebrates, and we collect samples across the county in every watershed. And we do so on 5-year cycles. And we also have targeted monitoring prior to restoration. So just recently, we have a few restorations that are likely to go in the next few years. So my team has been out looking at the aquatic resources. That speaks to the aquatics. I know that there are other groups within DEP that are looking at some terrestrial resources too.
Great, thanks, Ken. Any of the other panelists want to build on that? Really good question, Marion. Okay, with that, we'll move on to Lynn Parsons, you want to come off mute? Oh, sorry, Sujay, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, I wanted to say something. I don't know if this is the right thing to say or not, but I'm going to say it. So in terms of independent researchers, I just want to say something really very clear. We do get contracts to do research on projects, but sometimes our findings actually, they're not what what people want to hear, right? They're not always like, oh, this works, or I mean, sometimes we find trade-offs, sometimes we find effects of road salts that people don't want to hear about. A big part of our research is on salinization and road salt, and this actually relates directly to this question about biology. A lot of the streams in Maryland, there's a guy, Ray Morgan, who's probably retired now, but they found that the biotic diversity of the streams is related to the chloride concentrations or the conductivity of the water. And that's related to the impervious surface cover in the watersheds. So these streams, some of the ones that are urban, they actually are not rich in biological diversity, okay? And so, you know, I mean, I just want to say 2 points. Some of these streams are not rich in biological diversity. I mean, I'm not saying all, but the ones with heavy impervious surface. And number two, the scientists that work on these things, we provide objective, you know, evidence in peer-reviewed journals, like judged by the scientific community. So it's not like we're you know, there's some vested interest.
Yeah, thanks for those points, Sujay. And Eliza, I thought you had a question, but if you wanted to make a comment, go ahead, and then we'll go to Lynn.
I wanted to make a comment that was not in response to something, well, that was in response to a prior conversation about why we can't just put it all in impervious, you know, jackhammer all the impervious surface up, which ANS and Stormwater Partners Network have long advocated for jackhammering all the impervious surface up and replacing it with trees and green infrastructure. And specifically, we've advocated very hard. The Department of Environmental Protection is committed to a 60% green infrastructure in their portfolio. That was because of our advocacy. And we have pushed them for years on what they define as green infrastructure to help make up that 60%. And we have some differences of opinion, like the department considers stream restoration to be green infrastructure, and we don't. What we really like is bioswales and rain gardens. But what I wanted to say was that about 4 years ago, one of the specific kinds of practices that until then had been really ramping up, green streets, which are bioswales in residential neighborhoods, got just as controversial, if not more, than stream restorations are now. So all those of us who say we should do all this work upland, not in the streams, you know, need to be aware that there are other people who are just as honestly, furiously opposed to doing upland work because it's right in their neighborhoods and in front of their houses, and they would probably prefer streams, please, because it's out of the way in the you know, in the backyards, out of the neighborhoods. So that's not to say that, you know, one is good and one is bad. It's to say that these are. I just wish this wasn't so complicated. That's what I wish.
Thanks a lot, Eliza. And I don't want to leave Lynn hanging too long, but Solange, do you want to build on what Eliza's saying?
I just want to say one more thing, and that is that I'm all for you know, best management practices in the watershed, but it is good to keep in mind that, you know, research about the performance of these BMPs also indicate that, I mean, first of all, we don't know enough about them, and it's not like they all work and you know, endlessly, and so sometimes they don't work, and sometimes they just work for a very short period of time because, again, they are also impacted by development around them. So it's good to keep in mind that you know, it would be great if they all worked perfectly, but they don't. So they have problems as much as stream restoration. So
thank you, Solange. All right, so next, Lynn, I'm so sorry to keep you waiting. Are you a Montgomery County resident? And then if so, state your name and your question for the panel.
I'm Lynn Parsons. I'm a Montgomery County weed warrior. And
that's right. I'm sorry, I can't see your video, so I didn't remember you. Go ahead.
All right, I should have turned it on, but I'm not looking very ready for that. Anyway, I am not a scientist, but I have seen the results of stream restorations where the areas have been more rapidly overrun by invasive species. And, you know, nobody wants a solution more than I do, but what I see happening is it's just accelerating the loss of habitat. And so what is in the plan to manage that and stop that accelerated habitat loss? That's what I just can't, in my experience, figure out how anybody is going to stop that from happening once you do that bulldozing.
Yeah, Lynn, thank you for bringing up that question. All right, panelists who would like to field this? Go ahead, Solange.
Well, I can say something again. I mean, it's just a matter of methods, you know, developing better methods for restoration. And like Sujay said before, you know, I mean, we have this argument, but having information about, you know, what works, what doesn't, and why would help. So, you know, hopefully science can help improve the methods used. And I just want to add one thing. I do a lot of research with forest restoration in the tropics. Even forest restoration the methods used where you go there and plant trees, they had, there was a huge amount of research to help improve methods. So because, trees would grow, but then nothing would live in them, and then they would die after a while. Anyway, there is a lot that, science can inform, and then hopefully we can improve methods of restoration. That's where we should go.
Thanks a lot, Solange. Steve?
Yeah, invasive plants, obviously, we recognize are a huge problem. Invasive species of all kinds are an enormous problem. As I said, I've watched that with much dismay for a number of years. Recently seen heavy invasive species problems creeping into Shenandoah National Park, which just breaks my heart. I think in terms of what we can do with an individual project, that's one of the reasons why when our forest conservation plans, we've increased the maintenance period from 2 years to 5 years. That includes invasive species control. But it's a huge problem wherever you have a break in the tree canopy or disturbance of the soil, the sources of invasive plant species are just so rampant, and depends a little bit on how they're transported. Some are deposited in the droppings of birds that light in the trees along the edges and the breaks in the canopy. Some of the seeds are just washed downstream in floods. Trying to get a grip on this is really difficult, but I go lots of places all over the region, and there's invasive species everywhere. And I understand that if they're not managed, the stream restoration projects can accelerate and magnify that. But we're doing the best we can with trying to manage the invasive species that are within the disturbed area to try to give it a chance to recover. But if the invasive species sources are nearby, they're going to come in whether there's a stream restoration or not, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Steve. And once you can identify invasives and realize how prolific they are, it is kind of a scary thing. Scott, do you want to build on that? And then we'll go to our...
Sure. 2 points I wanted to make here. One of the approaches that we found very successful to deal with invasives, and we're not eliminating it, but we're finding that the more area where you re-wet in that floodplain, and thinking of, I'm even talking about the rethinking about how we measure stream restoration rather than in feet. Let's measure it in acres, right? And when we have that adjacent wetland habitat that we create next to, say, a small stream channel, invasives really just they don't really do well. Now that doesn't mean that things like reed canary and frag aren't something we need to keep an eye on. And then so that's a really great approach that we've been really successful at, especially in more rural areas where multiflora rose is a problem. It doesn't grow in wet areas. And real quick, ecologically speaking, come back to the deer, right? The deer come in and they love all the native stuff, and some of the invasives they don't really hammer. And ecology abhors a void. So what you have is too much deer pasture, and then the natives get hammered by the deer, and then the invasives take over that void. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Scott. And Ken, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead and ask the panelists your question.
Yeah, thank you. I have not seen any definitive proof that stormwater really can't be completely controlled upland. I mean, we've heard people say that, but I would love it if DEP could provide us some real data about that. But having said, I'm certainly willing to believe that may be true, and that you can't control the stormwater in every single sub-watershed, especially in places like Bethesda and downtown Silver Spring. But having said that, if I had been given equal time to show some photos of what these stream restorations look like, I think the majority of the folks on these calls would be.
Ken, what is your question for the panelists?
May I finish, Sadie? I believe that people will be horrified by the destruction that these stream restorations call. And I think it's in complete contradiction to our climate action plan, which calls for saving our forests, not destroying my estimation of up to 2 million square feet of forest for our last DEP permit. Thank you, Sadie.
Thank you. If any of the panelists could restate the question and want to address it, please feel free.
I can address some of what you raised, Ken. I think that the challenge is understanding and being willing to accept that there is complexity here more than just simple sound bites. When we're working these watersheds, we are working with public property, private property, state property, federal property in some cases. And the county doesn't have ability to convince everybody to join us in getting restoration done. Eliza has pointed out earlier some of the resistance we've felt. Scott Lowe pointed out how sometimes what looks like a perfect place for stormwater BMP isn't going to work because of soils, utilities, a number of things. So unfortunately, I wish it was as simple as saying, well, look, you should just be able to do this because that's what we want. It's simply not that easy. And while we are really striving, the other thing I want to say is we have provided a lot of evidence to show that clear cutting of forests is not something that we do. You might have seen examples of stream restoration where that might have happened. And you may have seen it as a picture in a point of time. We strive not to do that. And we really are not causing, not clear cutting even the amount of acreage that you think, not to mention the amount of acreage is not even that grand when you really look at the actual amount in acres and not square feet. So I do want to say those things, but then I'd like to turn it over to more questions, please.
Well, thanks a lot. Sujay?
Oh, I was just going to say, I actually think Ken brings up a good point. So, yeah, I see where he's going, actually. So the thing is that, like in downtown Silver Spring, Bethesda, we used to do our early floodplain reconnection stuff in Baltimore where the sewers were exposed and there was a lot of damage. I think what Ken's getting at, and I think this actually aligns with Scott and Ken Mack, like with stream restoration, there's a triage approach, right? And so some of these watersheds where the stream restorations are done are heavily impacted and some are probably less impacted. And so getting back to the original question, where and when should stream restoration be done? I mean, it's a reality, but it's also important in some of these very highly developed watersheds, if that makes sense.
Thank you for clarifying that for me, CJ. That's very helpful. All right, any of the other panelists? All right. Well, I wanted to mention, we're going to wrap up with a couple of comments, but one of the questions that we had pulled out would be, why does stream restoration look like a bomb attack? So that's something that we're going to address in our final comments. But any other final salient point from the panelists or anything you guys saw in the questions that you wanted to reiterate? I'll just pause here because we're almost at time for Q&A. Go ahead, Sanj.
Actually, it's just a curiosity, something that I'm going to talk not as a scientist, but just like a citizen. That I am always amazed. There is all this talk about, removal of trees and all, and we really don't need, trees removed in the watershed of Chesapeake Bay, period. On the other hand, I'm amazed. I live in Anne Arundel County, and every other month, there is like a huge area of forest that is cut for development. And so I just wonder if, I know that restoration shouldn't be cutting trees, and I know, methods will improve and also decision makers will do more and more to avoid removal. But I just wonder if where we are in terms of, discussion about development the way that it is. I mean, making humongous parking lots sometimes, in areas where we don't have trees and all that. I think we should, I mean, I hope that citizens that are really concerned about trees, really go against this crazy rate of development, and removal of trees. So anyway.
Well, thanks, Solange. And Eliza, you want to close us out with a final comment?
Sure. What I wanted to say was something that I think is that Debbie Sarabia's last point in the chat brought up for me, and it's something we struggle with the Stormwater Partners Network, which is that for capacity reasons, really, and because of the complexity of the different governments, we focus most on working with Montgomery County government. And that means mainly for this purpose of discussion around stormwater, mainly with Department of Environmental Protection, but there are other agencies and there's county council as well. But we always have to, in Stormwater Partners Network, remember, we have members and watersheds who cross, but from the county region to independent city regions. So Gaithersburg, Rockville, Germantown, and a few others, where those cities are responsible for their own stormwater permits and completely their own decision-making around what they choose to do with things like forest conservation and stream restoration. And it can be really, really challenging because they're very close, and the practices may look very different. I can't speak in depth to the specific practices that are going on because I don't have the capacity to really focus on those areas. I'm focusing on what the county is doing. So it's not to compare and contrast and say one is better, one is worse, but it is to say that this discussion, which has been great, is really about the county and what the county does and can do. Although the science extends, of course, beyond any one jurisdiction. And I hope that there are opportunities for making sure to share these ideas and this information out with the other jurisdictions that have their own places of control.
Great points, Eliza. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Well, thanks to all the panelists and thanks to all of you for asking your questions in previous webinars, through the registration, and now through the chat. It's really been my pleasure to moderate these sessions and learn about stream restoration together. I really appreciate everyone's time, and I'm going to turn it over to Amy Stevens for a couple of closing comments.
Thank you, Sadie, and thank you everyone again. So I am going to try to answer this question about where do we go from here, and where is the county going from here? I hope everyone has enjoyed these webinars. I certainly have. I've learned a lot. Community input is essential for successful projects, and Montgomery County will continue to use best practices and the latest science to conduct stream restoration projects to satisfy our latest MS4 permit requirements. The Department of Environmental Protection, the county's position is that stream restoration is a valuable state-approved technique in our portfolio compliance, but that doesn't mean that we're not listening and that we're not learning from you or that we're closed from the community concerns. We do have a primary driver, and that's our mission to protect and improve water quality. The MS4 permit is part of that. And for our most recent permit that we have received from the state, we have already completed several stream restoration projects, and there are currently 5 in design. There are 3 being done by the department and then 2 more being done by our parks partners. We have also installed several upland BMPs and then retrofits of stormwater ponds as well. And you can find more information about what we've done through, there's a map link that was placed in the chat, as well as through our annual report data that will get put onto the website very soon. So while we're not putting a pause on stream restoration, we have learned a tremendous amount. And I do say that honestly, that we are thinking about and hope to and are committing to modify and improving our programs. And I'm going to just list some of the areas where we've been learning through these webinars and through your concerns, things that we are striving to do and improve our programs. The first is to minimize our footprint from construction and access to the site. This is whenever possible. And we want to use some of the latest techniques, some of which we've heard about today. We know that industry is doing, and we're encouraged to see proposals for those kind of projects. we really work hard to protect our trees impacted by stream restoration. And those trees also impacted by the heavy stormwater flows by stabilizing our streams. But we want to plant more trees. I mean, that is something we want to do above and beyond. We want to plant more than what we took down. We want to be able to put more in there. We want to improve the biodiversity within our streams. We want to protect our large and our healthy trees and our native habitats. And we've heard that, and we really are going to be looking to do that through our stream restoration projects. We know we have to manage the invasives. We've heard it. We're trying to figure out how to do that just as much as everyone else. We haven't really gotten a clear answer exactly what we can do, but we're going to work on it because it's critical. We're going to do it during construction. We know we have 5 years of post-construction that we're going to have to do it through the Forest Conservation Law, but it shouldn't stop there, and we're going to keep working on that. We're especially going to work on these invasive vines that are really threatening the health of our trees. We want to invest more of our time and effort into understanding how stream restoration trade-offs and tree impacts might affect our climate action plans, carbon sequestration, and overall climate goals. We heard that loud and clear, and we know we need to start really looking at that and understanding that more and being able to answer those questions that you're posing to us. We want to put more funding and staff resources into maintenance of stream restoration. We know we need that too. That means not only maintaining the structures, but also looking at the vegetation and the non-structural parts of stream restoration and managing invasives. We want to work with our private landowners because many of the places where we do stream restorations is actually on private property, either owned by HOAs, owned by residents, or owned by businesses. And we need to work with them to encourage more riparian tree planting, creating more unmowed buffers, and just really encouraging riparian planting along stream corridors because many people like to mow right up to that stream, and you've seen it in some of the pictures. When we do a stream restoration project, we know we have to seek more input and feedback from the community about our projects and do it throughout all stages. We've heard that, and we're going to strive to do that. We also understand in a county like Montgomery County that we have to include our communication in all the languages that are spoken by the community and meet the community where they are to ensure we have successful engagement. We want to be able to communicate more about the goals of the project and be realistic about what's going to happen when we go and do the stream restoration, what kind of impacts you will see, what does the limit of disturbance look like, what trees might be impacted, and continually update as the project involves the community and the residents. We will continue to install upland BMPs. As you heard Eliza say, we have made a commitment. We're going to keep doing that. That's part of our project portfolio. But we also have Rainscapes and Tree Montgomery and our watershed grant program. And all of those things are really critical pieces of the work that we do. And we're going to continue to adapt based on the research, the techniques, the engineering, and the evolving and emerging science. So I know I'm almost out of time. I do want to put this plug in. I really appreciate everybody being here and caring. Please go to our websites if you want to do more, like volunteering, organizing stream cleanups, organizing community cleanups, figuring out how you can get involved, learning about look at our website and just to find out more. How do you get a free tree from Tree Montgomery? How do you do a Rainscape rebate project? Please check that out. We'll put links in the chat too. Okay, thank you again. I've probably said more than I should. I've gone over my time. I appreciate it.
I just want to shout out how useful it would be, Sadie, if you would send all participants the contact information for each other. So we can go to, Laura's website, but we can also connect with each other. I'm particularly interested in connecting with Scott Mcgill, but it would be wonderful to have everybody's contact information.
Thanks, Mary.
I think Frank wants to give a little closing so that we can end. And our stream restoration, because our webinar is actually gone over a minute. Oh, and if you want contacts, I'm sorry, and one other thing, if you are interested in getting contacts for our panelists, go ahead and email me. My email address is there, and then I'll distribute the information that way. I don't really have another method to do that. So just go ahead and email me. Thank you. Okay, Sadie, sorry.
Sadie, I'm gonna jump
Go
in.
ahead. Go ahead, Frank. Frank Dawson, Chief Watershed Restoration, Department of Environmental Protection.
Good evening, everyone. I'm gonna make a couple of comments and then I'm gonna let my boss, Adriana Hochberg, have the last word. My main job is to really thank everybody for joining us during this 4-part stream restoration webinar. These webinars have provided us with an opportunity to learn more about stream restoration, listen to the concerns that people have with this practice, and really importantly, engage in a civil dialogue. And we intend to continue this conversation. I have a lot of people to thank. Adriana, who's our acting director, helped us kick this off by challenging us to learn from each other and to have that civil dialogue. And we've done that. And Sadie, it's impossible to thank you enough for guiding, facilitating, and mediating all these sessions. This has been a tremendous time commitment for you personally and by the trust. And we could not have done this without your steady hand. And normally this would be the time for the round of applause, but we're virtual. To all the speakers, thank you for sharing your time, knowledge, experience, and opinions. And thanks for answering some of the challenging questions that have been raised in every session. Huge thanks to DEP staff. You've met Amy and Christy and Ken. Ryan Zerby's been a real steady hand behind the scenes, along with Phil Jones and Kate. I want to thank them for being brave enough to want to hold these webinars. It is not easy to confront controversy in a public forum. These staff are really representative of the passion that we have in DEP, and we all have the same endpoint in mind that you do. We care deeply about these issues, and we're trying to make a positive contribution every day. Lastly, I want to thank everybody who's joined us over the last couple of months. I hope that you feel like it's been a good investment of your time. I really believe that we do have the same vision to improve water quality and habitat in Montgomery County. And it's really incumbent upon all of us to continue to learn from both our successes and failures and work together towards cleaner water and to improve our ecological function. And every day we know that it is our job to continue to earn your trust. Shameless plug at the end. We all have a chance to lead by example. As Amy said, plant a tree, participate in the stream cleanup, install a rain garden. We have all these programs at DEP. Again, thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Adriana for the last word. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Frank. And I just want to take a quick moment to thank all the panelists, all of the participants for the great questions and comments that you've provided, the event organizers. I know it took a lot to bring all of this together. Everybody's here because we care deeply about this issue. We want to do what is the right thing. And, you know, as we've learned, this is complex. And the more I learn about this, the more complex it gets. It's definitely multifaceted, and I appreciate all the various points that were brought up to eliminate the multiple facets of this issue. I think a real underlining question behind all of this is, you know, how do we as people coexist with nature when everything seems to be out of whack around us? You know, what is the path forward? And so I think really, to underscore something that Solange and others have said is we need to be informed by science. Science is going to illuminate the path forward for us. And so I hope we can keep that in mind as we go forward and keep these channels of communication open because they're so vital and so important. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and close out the webinar series, and thanks everybody for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.